welcome Ian, and welcome to Kierra's Artist Talk.
My name is Kierra Branker. I'm an artist based out here in Orlando. I primarily am a lens-based artist, so that typically just entails just like with photography, with image making. With my work, it's been a lot of like building sets, building scenes, along with portraiture as well. My starting point when it comes to my work has always been like trying to capture like the memories, the artifacts and rituals towards like my own lived experience, along with like those of my family and my friends. My family is from Orlando, well not from Orlando, but from Trinidad and Tobago. So, you know, moving from Trinidad, living to Florida, like what does that look like inside the home, and how does that compare to being out in the world and experiencing these new things? And a lot of the things I've noticed in my practice is just like how these similar visual like markers and cues come up. So that's what I've always found my interest in, trying to kind of match the two, seeing the connection and how it lays together. I would say like my influences, definitely like looking into older photographers' work. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with James Vanderzee. He was an amazing like Harlem photographer back in the 1920s, did studio portraiture, and the way he would document just Black people going about their day, documenting Black life within the studio, but also outside of the studio, dressed up to the nines and just dressed up with their furs next to their cars, but also finding like those really tender moments between like, you know, a couple sitting at a bench together. Those kind of things are similar to what I try to capture in my work, trying to find those moments of like tenderness, but also telling the story of that person who's in front of the lens. Along with that, stylistically, you know, like Carrie Mae Weems in terms of like the colors, well, in terms of like the concepts, and then I would say Micheline Thomas in terms of like the colors and the patterns that I'm trying to emulate. So a lot of the work, it starts off with me kind of constructing the scene, printing out backdrops, drawing it, planning it out, along with like speaking first with my sitter who's in front of the camera to also just get an understanding of who they are as a person. I'll give them a couple of interview questions and just try to kind of like hone out and pick out a couple of things and moments that really call to them. So like a huge example is these two pieces of Maisha and Freedom. With these works, essentially we kind of like camped out at her Brooklyn apartment at the time and tried to make this whole scene in her bedroom. Like the backdrop of the wallpaper is something that I printed out, and for me, when I came across the initial design of it, I was thinking about my grandmother and how she decorated her home. It was also very much that kind of vibrancy. My grandmother, she was from Trinidad. Were all very much things that I was influenced by. And then for my friend as well too, because she's also Trinidadian. So I wanted to incorporate that element in there for her, along with like her books and like the photos of her family members, to kind of give you a sense of like who this person is, what kind of background she has, along with her dog too, the cutest thing, Luna. Both of those two pieces are kind of like suggesting towards like the self-reflection and also like this honoring of self. The first understanding of how we come to like see ourselves is through the home. Like that's the first place we have and we hold memories with ourselves and our family members, our friends. So kind of like capturing this interior scene was really important for me. Also like honing in on those same books that are there, and into the next frame with Freedom, you know, we have like a picture of Oprah and then like next to it a family image. So those are kind of like tied in terms of like how we understand ourselves through the family archive, but also through like popular culture. With Maisha at that time, she was a huge Oprah fan, how we integrate ourselves with like, you know, celebrity figures as well, and that also becomes our understanding of ourselves alongside with those books on economics and just like patterns of government. So yeah, it's kind of these three works were kind of like the entry point when I first started doing this kind of work. I was trying to understand myself as a person, you know, going to school in New York and seeing, you know, only a handful of like Black artists like myself in that space where everyone is mostly international. It became like a very eye-opening way of like seeing what my place is in the world. So those ones are always like my favorite ones to refer back to because it's always like the starting point of when I really started to understand what that all meant. And that's kind of like where the title Windows and Mirrors comes from, because it's essentially, you know, that interior space is where I started. It's how I start here, and it expands to the house. When I first started, I knew how to shoot. I was shooting through high school, had my classes, I had things that I was like kind of inspired by, but I never really felt tied to. But definitely during college, it kind of gave me this push into understanding like photography as like a theory, and especially because of how the way the work is, the exhibition is titled. It's referencing John Sarkowski, who back in the 1960s, he was a big curator for the MoMA. He was one of the main people who had that initial push for photography becoming what it is today, seen more as an art form rather than like, you know, somebody being a scribe and just being there to document, more so like a scientist and not so much as an artist. So during my time in college, it really helped me just like understand the full history of it, and especially like as a Black femme working in photography, how much weight that carries. As we all know, like photography did not have its like, you know, like a sincere start, I would say. The camera has always been used to kind of categorize Black people and to place Black people or to marginalize the other. So when coming into college and seeing that, it's like, oh, okay, like this is a whole another way of understanding it, and it has a much deeper meaning for me to hold this camera, because that gives me the opportunity to tell a different story, to break free from the canon of just like Western photography and also just like art history in general. History started for me in college, and then it kind of helped me build upon like, okay, well, what do I like to see in photography? And I kind of, you know, when looking at James Van Der Zee, Carrie Mae Weems, Deanna Lawson, all of those people that came before me helped like build this library to kind of like assure me like this is possible. You know, we have these opportunities here, and we can, you know, break free from that. I would start off with Brave New World. For me, that one really gets towards how I've been wanting to push my practice, like faced with like this large image of the globe itself, you know, placed next to, you know, a male and female African sculpture, and then just dominoes and other kind of like spiritual and ritual items that you would have there, and all along with in the background you have like these, you know, very I guess those Baroque frames, kind of like gilded gold kind of thing happening there with like the still lifes of the flowers. So it's for me it feels like a perfect moment to kind of like start on how I understand what it feels like to be a Caribbean Black artist, Afro-Caribbean artist, and what does that look like? How are we starting off with that? It's almost like sometimes, you know, we assume that like Black history started when Columbus dropped us off here, and it kind of comes off of that assumption, but then you see the two like African sculptures that feel older than the globe itself, and it's like, okay, we're working with something that's way past that. And so what I want people to discover in my work, where there's histories tied into certain spaces and places, and it's all layered on each other, so it's all kind of like tied in, bringing out this melting pot that's seen there. Also, I feel like this Brave New World is tied to the one in that little room there with Anointed, thinking about like time itself and how these things are all layered on each other despite time. Um, when I shot that one back in 2022, I had met up with the mom and this little girl Blake, who was just the cutest thing ever, and she was getting ready and prepping for her first carnival. And when I first came to their house, it was very much, just trying to document like the little moments of catching them, like kind of capture it more so like in a photojournalist kind of way. But then that picture, right as like her mom was adding the jewels, I saw it was like this moment of just like, her mom was also very much part of Carnival as well too. So it was a very big moment for her mom because it's like, I'm seeing my little baby do the things that I did when I was a little baby, and being able to pass that on. I can't imagine the feeling that like her mom was having, and being able to capture that kind of like reflects that get it and come back. Like we're taking the things that we're learning and we're bringing it back, either for like our descendants or for the people who came after us or came before us, so that there's this understanding of like who we are as a community. And the title Get It and Come Back comes from the West African and deeper symbol of the Sankofa, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it has like a little bird with like the egg on its back. Yeah. So essentially it's like, you can't really know where you're going if you don't look behind you. It's that kind of idea that I feel like both of those, out of those two, like really get at how I've been thinking about my practice, like this always like reaching behind and thinking about all the things that people may have not left for me per se, but just have been like little clues towards our own, our own coming of the Black diaspora.
How has, I guess, looking behind influenced your work today? So how is it different from when you started? Like, do you have a different kind of physical lens that you're looking through when you're capturing moments, or how has your work, I guess, evolved from these gorgeous shots here to some of the later works, or is it all kind of meshed and blended together?
It feels like a mesh, but I will say there's been like some steps away. I feel like my earlier work was very constructed, being that like I saw what I wanted to see and just like built it out and talked with my sitters, my collaborators, and how we can build it as much as possible, from like bringing like props that I had or things that they had and kind of like blending the two. But I feel like now it's been almost like right place, like right time, when I think about that, and also just like a little bit looser as well. So like with these works, like I know I wanted to capture kind of like the moment on the beach of just like arrival. So for example, like Nyla's spiral, it kind of gives like this assumption of this like otherworldly being that's just arrived onto the beach, and that's what I wanted to capture with that one, along with like the Two of Cups, where it's kind of like providing like a moment of rest between two lovers. So I definitely feel like as much as like I've gotten more, I guess, photojournalistic or more like depicting what's in front of me, I've also been able to kind of like blend kind of like my own mythologies into it as well, allowing for like a little bit more play there. Because sometimes it's nice to have everything structured, but it's also nice to just be able to kind of like come across a moment as well. So like for these ones, as well as there's one behind y'all of Lover's Rock. It's another portrait of two lovers behind like a blue tarp and like a metal gate. That one was also shot at the same time as in Wellington, of the little girl in the back. But for that one, I did not know those people until I took that photo. I saw them dancing during Carnival, and I was like, y'all look amazing. Like, can I take a photo of you? And the lady, she lit up. She really lit up. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, do it. So a lot of it kind of like, it feels like the right place, right time. They kind of like embodied that sense of how I imagine Lover's Rock, which is like that kind of like rock steady, downbeat, reggae, you know, and it's such a tender moment. Yeah, it's been interesting. I definitely, it feels like a merge, but I'm also like, not really a merge, maybe an expansion, I would say.
So more like more organic as opposed to like still life.
Yeah, yeah.
But both are beautiful, and I feel like even these here that were put together still offer like an organic feel, because there's so many elements and spaces that you can visually go into, even though it is structured.
Yeah. Like I think it's the moment of like the AC unit, like those parts where I'm not really hiding those things.
Oh, yes.
Is it too early to ask a question?
No, go ahead.
So how has your environment, like specifically like location and where you are, impacted your direction when it comes to like shooting like images within this collection? Because I see windows and mirrors. When I think of that, I think of like perspective and different viewpoints, right? So how does that shift based on where you have been in these moments and in these cities and locations?
Yeah, it's changed a lot, and also like in the same way of Amber asking about like the process of like what's changed now. You know, these initial works were in Brooklyn. I was very much, it felt kind of stationary in that like I had time to kind of like, you know, print out backdrops and like go back to the same place and like build out these little enclosures for like my sitters, or like, you know, the one with the lottery ticket paper, like that can like stay there, and it felt, you know, it's a still life and it's really still because it's not going nowhere after I shoot it. But it's been, now it's because I'm back home, and that was probably the biggest challenge of like, okay, like I'm not here now in Brooklyn, like I'm in Orlando, so how can I like still talk about those similar things but also in a new location? So for me, it kind of like, it almost ventured outside. So like, for example, like this one, By Faith, by Not by Sight, that one was shot in Orlando. I wanted to kind of capture that kind of like spirituality that was happening, like in earlier works of Brave New World, but also, you know, in the environment that I was in. And for me, whenever I'm like shooting in some place new, I'm still looking for those visual markers. So like things like that remind me of like Trinidad, or, you know, my own childhood. So one thing is bamboo, definitely, because my grandmother's home in Trinidad has so much bamboo, just strewn about. So for me, it was seeing that and being like, okay, like this is something that's calling to me. I have to try to take a picture of it, and it was that perfect time of, I don't want to say perfect, but it was during COVID. It was, you know, everybody wasn't sure about what to do outside. Nobody was sure if we would be outside. So I was like, I'm gonna be outside. So it was that kind of uncertainty that was also literally in the air, and trying to like make this moment for myself to kind of like either like relax or just like to ground myself in. It was very grounding, like work. Once I came back to it, it just felt like okay, yeah. And just like having the rosary, the very large rosary with the knife, like we were talking about it earlier, just like staying protected no matter the cost, and also just knowing that like our steps are ordered, like it doesn't really, you know, we don't have to really see to know where we're headed in that way. So with Brooklyn and then Orlando and then Miami and this one, it's kind of like that similar outside feeling of being on the beach. For this one, I'll talk about this one for Juicy Fruit. Oh, yeah, go for it.
So for Not By Faith, Not by Sight, you talked about how you were kind of in a moment during COVID where everyone was just being still, which I personally find that we find our true selves when we're still and quiet, and we can hone into different places, whether it's creativity, spirituality, our faith, whatever it is. But when we're still and quiet, we're able to open up new doorways, honestly. So you mentioned that that kind of came about during that era. Did that particular shot, was it influenced by the fact that everyone was kind of tucked away and the uncertainty of it all, or was it just a coincidence? Because I could definitely put those two together as to how someone could feel like that during COVID and just not knowing what was next.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely came up as a coincidence. I feel more so because it was like I wanted to kind of capture the original title for that work was protection. So with that, I had this vision of just like I want to capture myself kind of like looking away, not providing gaze towards the viewer, and just show like a moment of power. So with the knife and also with like the rosary, I kind of wanted to just show that feeling of like not really having to look back, and also, you know, just looking towards whatever I'm looking at, not really worried about whatever the viewer is looking at behind me. So yeah, definitely.
Because there's so many elements and spaces that you can visually go into.
Coincidence, but when, like later on, it was like, oh wait, okay. And then I think I saw like a piece by another amazing Central Florida artist, Mary Proctor. I saw her work, and she had a work that was similarly titled, and like it was like these two ladies, like in their best church gowns, church outfits, and they're both having their arms behind their back and like looking up. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I saw it and I felt like, okay, this is very similar to the one that I made. That was like, we're still like, it was like a way of like finding conversation in that. So I was like, okay, I gotta change it now. That's making more sense.
The name is very pretty.
Yeah, and it like it, you know, sometimes I feel like with work, it takes me a while to like. Sometimes the title comes super easy to me. Other times it can take like 2 years, and that one was one that took 2 years. I find like titling is also just as important as like the image making, where it's like that poetry that happens between the words and the image really matters. So half the time I'm like, okay, well you're just gonna have to stay on title or you know whatever. But yeah.
So back to Juicy Fruit up here.
Yes. So with this one, it was all essentially these were all shot the same weekend. These ones are shot the same day. This one wasn't necessarily intention, but the way it happened, it was great. Because one of my sitters, they both brought dolls. Two of them, they both bought like little, I don't know if you've seen them, but like little Caribbean dolls, and they have like a headdress, and they have like a matching plaid dress. I was going to use it to kind of like create something similar to what's happening with Freedom, and being that like it was going to be like a kind of like constructed still life moment. For those ones, I was trying to just like, they handed me the doll. I was trying to see how it was going to fit, and then I noticed the doll didn't have any legs. So I was like, it was just torso, head, and just a cone of like straw, and then the dress covering it. And I thought that was so interesting in terms of just like relating it back to gender and how like, you know, the dress is always like the standard because it's you know, it's the way a woman's supposed to dress, and also like the fact that the doll didn't have legs provided no agency towards it. And so when we were talking about it, I was like, what? This is so, it was so interesting. And then I saw my friend have literally a similar plaid dress, and I saw the mango. They were trying to hold something else, and they had the mango there. And I was like, hold on, wait. Don't
So
move.
this was organic. She
Yeah.
was just holding it while doing something else.
Yeah, like I was having her do a completely different shot.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was like, when I saw that, I was like, it brought me back to that moment of the dress, and like, you know, I'm literally, you're seeing the mango, the thing that's supposed to be hidden, the metaphorical thing, we all know, yes,
The
the
juicy fruit.
loins, right. So it tied in perfectly. I told them like, hold up, like, don't move. And they're like, oh, I see what you're talking about. So.
So, what would you like for people to take away from your work? Like, what evoking feeling, or if there is anything, like, what are you trying to stimulate in the mind of those that view your pieces?
Yeah, I think connection and just like also like a reverence for like the past, while also like embracing like what's right in front of them. I want people to feel embodied. I want people to immediately see the work and be like, that reminds me me of like a time when like we were out, you know, as kids getting ready to play, or you know, also like this moment of just like reflection and like assuredness in the self, for sure. Like I want people to feel powerful. I want my sitters to feel powerful. I want them to feel like, you know, like seeing themselves in this space. It totally takes them out of their everyday, or even back into their everyday, so that they can walk in that kind of like realm of confidence. I want people to feel like their stories are being remembered, and that somebody's there to document it too. So,
Well, are you working on anything interesting or exciting coming down the pipelines, or any new projects?
yeah, definitely trying to get this book out. Definitely trying to get this book out. I told myself I got really good news from someone, so I will announce that later. But essentially, that getting a grant towards, you know, the production of that book, that I'm hoping to get done by 2024, get it and come back. So essentially those kind of like ideas of, you know, our ancestors traveling with us and us bringing back for our ancestors is the vibe I'm trying to get at with that book. So a lot of these works you might see in there, see a couple pages, but yeah, other than that, just plain.
Where can we keep up with you and find you, social media?
My Instagram is Kierra.Davon. Instagram is the main thing I got. If you want to follow me on TikTok, I guess. There's the fruit stand, but you don't have to do that. And then my website, which is just Kierra Branker as well. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a great chat. Of course.